It was an ordinary Tuesday, one of those forgettable, gray-edged days where nothing remarkable ever happens. I was scrubbing the bathroom tiles on my hands and knees, sleeves pushed up, hair falling loose around my face, when my hand brushed against something smooth tucked behind a stack of folded towels. I pulled it free. A small glass bottle. Delicate, feminine, perfume, but not mine. The scent escaped as I twisted the silver cap, filling the room with a sweetness that made my stomach churn. Not floral, like the lavender I wore, but something deeper, sultry, almost predatory. I stared at it in my palm, feeling the walls of the room pull back, stretch, bend around me. Whose was this? The question rang like a bell in the hollow of my chest. I should have stopped there. I should have put it back, told myself a story about a gift meant for me, about a forgotten surprise. But something old and animal in me, something starved, pushed me forward. I moved like a ghost through the house, opened drawers, lifted couch cushions, slipped fingers into jacket pockets. In the sock drawer, a pair of tiny gold hoop earrings I'd never worn, still warm from being recently tucked away. In the trash can in his office, a crumpled restaurant receipt, 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine, a date circled 2 weeks ago, the night he'd said he was stuck late at work, some emergency meeting, that went into the early hours. Each discovery peeled back another layer of my carefully curated life, like wallpaper coming off in ugly strips. I sat on the edge of our bed, the wedding ring on my finger suddenly heavy, alien. The ceiling fan spun lazily above me, indifferent. I listened to its rhythmic click, click, click as my mind filled in scenes I had never witnessed, but now saw in ruthless detail. His smile turned toward someone else. The warmth I thought was mine draped over another woman like a borrowed coat. The phone buzzed beside me. His name. I blinked down at the screen. Working late again? Love you. The words stared up at me like a lie carved into stone. I set the phone down with shaking hands, careful, as if it might explode. The walls of the house seemed to tighten, leaning in, whispering every overlooked moment back to me. The hurried showers, the turned-away glances, the late nights framed in excuses too flimsy to hold weight. My life, this life I had chosen, built, watered like a delicate garden, was no longer real. It was a prop, a stage set. And I was the last one left standing in the spotlight, still trying to remember my lines. My fingers closed around the little bottle of perfume. I tucked it into the drawer of my nightstand without thinking, a tiny coffin for the woman I used to be, the one who still believed in him. Somewhere deep inside, something cracked. A small, almost imperceptible fracture. But I knew. There would be no putting it back together. Not this time. If you had asked me 3 years ago where I thought I'd be by now, I would have painted you a very different picture. I would have told you about a small sun-drenched studio tucked above a bakery, where the scent of fresh bread and coffee curled into my open windows as I worked. I would have told you about the canvases stacked against the walls, splashed with colors so loud they almost sang, and the stubborn joy that lived in my chest every time I picked up a brush. Back then, life had been messy, loud, alive. I lived among other dreamers. People who talked too fast and laughed too loudly, who believed in impossible futures and clung to each other like family. There were gallery nights that bled into sunrise breakfasts, whispered secrets on fire escapes, music vibrating through the soles of my shoes. I was one of them. Wild. Unfinished. Hopeful. Then came Ethan. He was everything the city was not. Solid, steady, safe. He wore pressed shirts and clean smiles, He listened, asked questions, remembered the names of my friends and the little things I said in passing. When he looked at me, I felt seen in a way that made all the noise inside me quiet down. For the first time, I could breathe. When he asked me to move with him, away from the city, into a quiet suburban town with neat lawns and cul-de-sacs, I didn't even hesitate. I packed my life into boxes. I sold the studio for barely enough to cover a few months' rent. I hugged my friends goodbye with promises of visits that slowly dissolved into silence. I told myself it was growth. I told myself it was love. At first, it was easy to believe. We bought a house with a white fence and a fireplace. I traded my paint-splattered jeans for sundresses. I learned to bake pies and host dinner parties where the wine flowed and the conversation stayed polite. My art supplies, my brushes, my oils, my half-finished dreams were packed into the attic, just for now, tucked away like childhood, toys outgrown. I told myself I didn't miss it. Not really. But sometimes when the house was too quiet and the afternoon stretched long and empty, I would wander up there, trailing my fingers over the dusty lids of boxes, feeling like a ghost, haunting a life she barely remembered living. The red flags came slowly, like rain soaking into wood. You don't notice the damage until the foundation starts to rot. At first, it was little things. "How's my little housewife?" he would tease, tousling my hair when I showed him a new sketch. The kind of condescension wrapped in affection that left bruises invisible to the eye. He'd laugh when I talked about opening a gallery someday. "Who's going to buy that stuff around here, babe? Stick to what you're good at." Sometimes I caught the glances he gave the clock when I rambled about a new project idea. Sometimes he forgot to introduce me at work events, leaving me stranded in conversations where I smiled too hard and drank too fast just to stay afloat. Friends noticed before I did. One by one, they pulled away. Invitations declined. Texts unanswered. I saw the warnings in their eyes when we bumped into each other downtown. "Are you okay? You don't seem like yourself anymore." I smiled and said I was fine. I clung to the belief that love was supposed to feel like sacrifice, wasn't it? Looking back now, I can see it all so clearly. The slow erosion of who I was, the way I let myself be shaped by the idea of what he needed, what he wanted. I became a vase on a shelf, decorative, dusted, rarely noticed unless something was missing. I told myself it was enough, because to admit otherwise would have meant facing the truth. I was disappearing, and he was holding the brush. Some nights, when the insomnia wrapped its cold fingers around me, I would slip into the attic, sit among the forgotten parts of myself, run my hands over the brittle bristles of a brush, the cracked lids of old paint tubes. The perfume I used to wear, lavender and lemon, light as laughter, sat unopened in a drawer, gathering dust. Instead, I wore what Ethan liked, vanilla and musk. The scent, he said, made me smell like home. I wasn't a home. I was a museum of everything I had abandoned. But I didn't know that yet. Not fully. Not until the day the wrong perfume bottle slipped from behind the towels and shattered everything I'd so carefully tried to preserve. It happened on a Thursday. Funny, isn't it? How the worst moments of your life never bother to arrive with any warning. No storms gathering on the horizon, no ominous music swelling, just a Thursday, just another ordinary evening wrapped in the soft hum of normalcy. I was folding laundry at the foot of our bed, the scent of fresh cotton rising from the warm pile in front of me. My hands moved automatically, fold, stack, repeat, while my mind drifted, untethered, half listening to the television murmuring from the living room where Ethan sat, lounging, with a beer in hand, and then his phone rang. I heard him answer it with a low chuckle, the kind he hadn't used with me in, God, how long had it been? Months? Years? Curiosity tugged at me first. I paused, a half-folded shirt drooping from my fingers, and listened. "Hey, baby," he said, voice dipping into a tone so tender, so intimate, that the floor seemed to tilt beneath me. God, I've missed you. I never stopped loving you, not for a second. The words sliced through me. Hot, violent, unmistakable. I stumbled back, clutching the bedpost for balance as my vision blurred. I felt like I was falling, endlessly, with nothing to catch me but the cold realization that the life I thought we shared had already been abandoned, long before I ever noticed the doors creaking open. I pressed myself against the wall, heart pounding so loudly I was sure he would hear it. I could hear the laughter in his voice, soft and golden, dripping with a love he hadn't reserved for me in what felt like a lifetime. I don't remember how long I stood there. Long enough for the call to end, for the television to resume its meaningless chatter. Long enough for the numbness to turn into something jagged and raw. I moved like a ghost through the house, gathering my silent evidence. The perfume tucked behind the towels, the restaurant receipts folded and forgotten in the pockets of his jackets, the phone bills with unfamiliar numbers called late into the night. I laid it all out like a shrine to my own stupidity. Proof undeniable that love could rot in secret while you went on dusting the furniture. When he came upstairs, I was waiting, sitting cross-legged on the floor, the artifacts of betrayal scattered around me like bones at a crime scene. He stopped short in the doorway, his face a flicker of irritation before he masked it with that careful, blank stare. I held up the bottle of perfume, the one that wasn't mine, the one that smelled like lies. I let it dangle from my fingertips like a dead thing. His eyes didn't even flinch. "Whose is it?" I asked. My voice sounded foreign to me, dry and rusted at the edges. He shrugged, as if I had asked him about the weather. "Her name's Claire," he said simply. "I'm leaving. For her." No apology. No excuses. Just fact, like announcing a change in dinner plans. Something inside me splintered. I thought I would scream. I thought I would rage. But instead, I felt everything inside me collapse inward, folding in on itself like a dying star. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The world shrank to the narrow hallway between us, the way the lamplight caught on the tiny scratches in the hardwood floor, the sickly sweet smell of vanilla perfume still clinging to the air. He stepped around me carefully, as if I were an inconvenience, a piece of furniture to be navigated. I stayed there, rooted to the spot, long after the front door slammed shut behind him, long after the sound of his car faded into the night. When my legs finally gave out, I crawled, not walked, into the bathroom. The tiles were cold against my skin. I pressed my cheek to the floor, gasping in shallow, broken sobs that ripped from my chest with animal ferocity, mourning not just the man or the marriage, but the version of myself who had believed she was safe, who had believed she was loved, who had believed that if she gave enough, stayed small enough, worked hard enough, it would be enough. It wasn't. It had never been. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had unraveled. In the mirror above the sink, I caught a glimpse of myself. Eyes swollen, face blotched with grief, hair a tangled halo of despair. I barely recognized her. The woman staring back at me was a stranger, cracked down the middle. But in the shattered reflection, something small flickered, a spark. Buried beneath the mountain of heartbreak, anger stirred. Not the wild, explosive kind, not yet. This was something smaller, meaner. A hot coal pressed into the palm of my hand, refusing to die. For the first time, in a very long time, I didn't think about what Ethan would want, or what Ethan would say, or how Ethan would feel. I thought about me, the girl who used to dance barefoot on rooftops, the artist who used to paint without apology, the woman who had dimmed herself down to fit into a life that had never been built for her in the first place. He had discarded me like a forgotten letter. But I wasn't going to disappear. Not this time. I wiped my face on the sleeve of my shirt, pulled myself upright, trembling but alive. The anger was still small, still fragile, but it was enough to light the first match. And this time, I was going to burn the right things down. I left while the world slept. The clock on the nightstand blinked 2:43 a.m. in pale, trembling digits, casting faint blue shadows across the bedroom where my life had ended without ceremony. The suitcase sat open on the bed, its gaping mouth hungry for the last scraps of me. I packed without thinking. A pair of worn jeans, 2 sweaters, one heavy and fraying at the sleeves, a photograph creased at the edges of my mother and me, taken long before life had learned how to hurt me properly. The rest I abandoned. All the pretty dresses he liked, the delicate shoes bought for parties where I smiled too much and drank too little, I left them hanging like hollow ghosts in the closet. And then the ring. Our wedding ring, small, unadorned, a circle meant to symbolize forever. It slipped off my finger with a strange ease, landing in the bathroom sink with a soft, final clink. A sound so small, so innocent, and yet it echoed through me like a cannon shot. I stared at it for a long moment, shimmering under the brittle bathroom light, before turning away. No dramatic farewell, no final tearful look over my shoulder. Just the closing of a door, soft and certain, and the clicking of my heels down the front steps into the pre-dawn hush. I drove for hours, the empty highway unfurling endlessly ahead of me. The sky bruised into violet and then into a gray so heavy it seemed to press against the earth. The radio stayed silent. I couldn't bear to fill the space with noise. I needed the silence, sharp, clean, pure, to strip me bare. 2 hours. South, tucked into a forgotten crook of the coastline, I found it. A town so small it barely warranted a name. A place where the ocean sighed against the rocks like an old, tired woman, and where the scent of salt and wood smoke clung to the air. Rented a tiny room above a sleepy bookstore, The Tide's End, hand-painted in curling letters on the cracked window. The owner, Marla, was a woman in her 60s with wild gray hair and laugh lines so deep they seemed carved into her bones. She didn't ask many questions, just handed me a key and a smile soft enough to undo the first knot in my chest. The room was small. A twin bed tucked under the slanted roof, a chipped dresser, a window that rattled when the wind grew bold. But it was mine. It smelled of old paper and salt and freedom. The first night, I sat cross-legged on the bed, suitcase still unopened, watching the stars drown one by one in the tide of morning light. Grief gnawed at me in small, steady bites. But somewhere beneath it, a strange sensation stirred. A thread of relief, delicate and golden, weaving its way through the wreckage. I was alone. And for the first time in years, it felt like an answer, not a punishment. The days fell into a rhythm as brittle and beautiful as autumn leaves. Mornings spent wandering the beach, toes sinking into cold, forgiving sand, the wind tearing through my hair with feral tenderness. Afternoons shelving dusty books in the shop downstairs, the smell of ink and old wood wrapping around me like a quilt. Evenings curled under threadbare blankets, tracing the cracks in the ceiling with my eyes, letting the silence stretch out until it became a kind of prayer. Marla took me under her wing without ceremony. She'd invite me for tea in the back room. After closing, setting chipped mugs between us with hands that had long ago stopped bothering with pretenses. "You got the look of someone who's seen the wrong side of love," she said once, eyes twinkling kindly over the rim of her mug. I smiled. A small broken thing. "Something like that," I whispered. She didn't press. She just nodded, as if heartache was a language she understood fluently, and turned the conversation to the weather. I found comfort in her steadiness, in the slow, unremarkable goodness of ordinary days. The beach became my confessional. I would walk for hours, letting the cold bite at my cheeks, watching the waves hurl themselves against the rocks and retreat, again and again, tireless in their surrender. There was something beautiful in their persistence, something that made my own bruised spirit sit up a little straighter. Each sunset felt like a benediction, the sky burning itself down to ash and gold before slipping quietly into the sea. Each night, as darkness folded over the town like a worn quilt, I imagined the tide washing away another layer of pain, polishing the jagged edges of me into something softer. The grief didn't leave all at once. It leaked out slowly, like seawater, through a cracked hull, and some nights I thought it might drown me anyway. I missed the life I thought I had. I missed the woman I had been before I learned how little I meant to someone who once promised forever. But survival isn't a triumphant roar. It's a whisper, repeated over and over until it fills the hollow spaces inside you. I'm still here. I'm still here. I'm still here. In the quiet, I began to stitch myself back together with threads spun from solitude and salt air. The perfume that once haunted my skin faded. The wedding ring I left behind felt less like an amputation and more like the shedding of dead weight. In the bookstore, tucked between the stories of other broken souls who found their way home, I remembered how to breathe without pain. I remembered how to exist without apology. And slowly, so slowly it almost went unnoticed, the ember inside me, that small, furious coal, began to glow brighter. It wasn't enough yet to set the world ablaze, but it was enough to light the way forward. And I knew, deep in the marrow of my bones, that one day soon, Ethan would look back and realize what he had thrown away. But by then, I would be long gone. A ghost he could never touch again. The attic smelled of dust and forgotten dreams. I found it by accident. A narrow door tucked behind a row of antique cookbooks no one ever touched. The wooden stairs creaked under my bare feet as I climbed, one hesitant step at a time, into the gloom. Light leaked through a single round window, slicing through the shadows in thin, trembling beams. In the half-light, I saw them, the relics of someone else's abandoned passions. Easels leaned drunkenly against the far wall. Jars of hardened brushes sat like fossilized soldiers. Canvases, yellowed and curling at the edges, rested in a crooked stack. And there, tucked under a faded tarp, were paints. Thick tubes, some cracked, some still supple when I squeezed them tentatively between my fingers. For a long time, I just stood there breathing in the scent of turpentine and mold, feeling something ancient and aching stir inside me. I hadn't picked up a brush in years. Not since I traded color for quietness, not since I abandoned myself for him. My hands shook as I peeled back the tarp fully. It felt like unearthing a grave, or maybe a resurrection. Later that night, when the bookstore had gone dark and the ocean outside whispered to the moon, I climbed back into the attic carrying a battered sketchbook I found among the forgotten things. The first stroke was clumsy, the second, angrier. By the third, something inside me cracked open like a dam giving way. I painted until my arms ached, and my heart felt raw and real again. Not pretty, polite landscapes like I used to submit to galleries. No. Now it was violence and fire and grief, and hunger splattered in reds and blacks and golds. Scenes of women breaking free of cages made from wedding rings. Figures crumbling into sand under a gaze that should have loved them but didn't. Each brushstroke was a scream I hadn't known how to give voice to. When dawn broke, washing the attic in a bruised pink light, I lay on the dusty floorboards, staring at the chaos I had created. And for the first time in what felt like centuries, I smiled. Not because I was healed, but because I had finally remembered I was still alive. It was Marla who discovered me, a few days later. I must have left the attic door ajar. She wandered up, a tray of tea in her hands, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the creaking stairs. I heard the quiet gasp before I saw her standing there, taking in the madness splattered across canvas after canvas. I tensed, waiting for judgment. Instead, she chuckled low in her throat, a sound warm enough to melt iron, and said, "Well, girl, looks like the sea's not the only thing stirring up storms around here." I laughed, startled by the sound of it in my own mouth. Marla insisted I bring a few pieces to a local cafe she knew. The Salty Finch, a cozy place filled with mismatched chairs and fairy lights strung across the ceiling. "You can't just keep all that locked up here to rot," she said, tapping a wrinkled finger against my forehead. "It's not healthy." I was terrified, but something reckless and trembling inside me said yes. They hung my paintings on the cafes, cracked brick walls, a chaotic gallery of rage and rebirth. And to my disbelief, people noticed. Whispers started first, hushed conversations over chipped mugs of coffee, heads tilting thoughtfully at my furious brush strokes. A woman wept quietly, before one of them, tracing the outline of a burning heart with trembling fingers. A man sat for an hour staring at a piece called Broken Promises, his knuckles white against his cup. And then, one rainy afternoon, she appeared, sleek as a cat in a gray cashmere coat, silver hair pulled into an elegant knot. Victoria Langley, a patron of the arts, whispered about in the circles I once only dreamed of entering. She found me hiding behind the counter, thumbing the pages of a battered novel I wasn't reading. "Your work," she said, voice crisp like fresh linen, "is brutally exquisite." I could only nod, words caught in my throat. "I'm hosting a gallery show next month," she continued, eyes gleaming. "I want you there. Think about it." She pressed a card into my hand, heavy, embossed, and swept out into the rain without waiting for an answer. I clutched the card to my chest, heart pounding so loudly I thought it might crack the windows. It wasn't just about the art. It was about remembering that there had been something inside me all along that no man could ever truly steal. Weeks later, as preparations for the show began, prints ordered, invitations mailed. The past crept back into my life like a spider slipping under the door. Her name was Lacey, a mutual acquaintance from my old life, someone who had once sat across my kitchen table, sipping wine and pretending not to. Envy the life I thought I had. She found me by accident, recognizing my name attached to the gallery flyer making its rounds online. She reached out, casual and smiling, unaware of the ruins I had fled. We met for coffee in a seaside cafe, rain spitting against the windows as she gossiped, oblivious to the time bomb she was winding in my lap. "I guess you're lucky you left when you did," she said, stirring her latte absent-mindedly. "Ethan's been, well, let's just say karma doesn't skip." My fingers tightened around my cup. "What do you mean?" She leaned in, voice low and conspiratorial. "He's drowning. Financially, professionally. His perfect reunion with her, the old flame, exploded into a mess. She's suing him for fraud. Turns out he did some shady things with the joint accounts." She trailed off, glancing at me with a sly little smile. My blood turned to ice. I kept my face neutral, nodding sympathetically, but inside, something colder, sharper, coiled tight. Later that night, under the jaundiced light of the attic, I dug into the records. Slowly, methodically, I pieced it together. Debts Ethan had tried to funnel into my name. Property transfers he had falsified. A paper trail of betrayal thicker and fouler than anything I had imagined. And with every document I uncovered, every email unearthed, that small ember inside me roared into an inferno. This wasn't just personal anymore. It was war. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I didn't collapse into the floor like I once had. I smiled. A slow, dangerous smile. I gathered everything carefully, building a legal storm with the precision of an artist framing her final masterpiece. Not for revenge alone, but for closure, for justice, for the woman I used to be, and for the woman I was finally becoming. The woman who no longer begged for scraps of love, the woman who had painted herself back to life. Filing the papers was almost boring. There was no climactic music, no dramatic gasp from a courtroom, just the sterile click of a pen against a clipboard, the quiet shuffling of forms passed across a scratched counter. But as I signed my name, full, strong, unshaken, a small tremor of something powerful rippled through me. Not anger, not vengeance. Something cleaner. Something like justice. The documents were surgical. Claims against the property Ethan had illegally transferred. Evidence of fraudulent debts he tried to anchor to my name. A civil suit demanding not just what was mine, but restitution for the scars he left in his wake. I didn't flinch. Not once. I wore the silver bracelet Marla had given me, a simple chain with a tiny paintbrush charm, around my wrist that day. It caught the light when I moved, a reminder of who I had become while he wasn't looking. I filed the papers under my new name, not his. Never again, his word traveled fast in the brittle, glass-floored world we used to walk. Mutual acquaintances, lawyers, whispers at the edges of polite society. Did you hear? She's back. She's doing better than ever. Did you know about the, gallery, about the lawsuit? I imagined the look on Ethan's face when the first certified letter landed on his doorstep. I imagined the way his hands must have trembled, realizing I had been silent, but not broken. And then one day, he reached out, a message, short, desperate, like a drowning man clawing at driftwood. Please, can we talk? I made mistakes. I was lost. I never meant to hurt you. I read it once, twice. The words tasted bitter in my mouth. The old me, the woman who once sat sobbing on a cold bathroom floor, would have clung to those words like a prayer, would have found excuses in them, would have run barefoot back into the fire just for the chance to be chosen again. But the woman who held the brush now, she felt nothing but a clinical sort of curiosity. Still, I agreed to meet, not for him, for me. I chose a quiet cafe near the waterfront, a different town, a different life. Neutral ground. I wore a simple cotton dress, pale blue, the color of the sky just before dusk. No jewelry except the little bracelet. No makeup beyond a trace. Of lip balm, I wanted no armor. No masks. I wanted him to see exactly who I was now, and who he had no power over anymore. When I walked in, he was already there, hunched at a table by the window, nervously twisting a coffee cup between his hands. He looked smaller somehow. Deflated. His once perfect hair was rumpled, his shirt carelessly buttoned. There were shadows under his eyes, deep hollows etched by regret, or maybe just the collapse of the shallow empire he had tried to build. When he saw me, he stood too quickly, knocking his chair against the wall. A few heads turned. He looked like a man who had rehearsed 1,000 speeches in the mirror and found every one of them crumbling on his tongue. "Hi," he croaked. I slid into the seat across from him, folding my hands in my lap. The empty place where my wedding ring used to sit felt light, almost weightless. He stumbled through apologies. He was confused. He made mistakes. He thought he needed to find himself. He didn't realize what he had until it was gone. He cried. Real tears, messy and unself-conscious. Once those tears would have torn me apart. Once I would have reached for him, desperate to mend the rift, desperate to save what we had built. But now I watched him dispassionately, like a stranger watching a storm batter a house they no longer lived in. His words washed over me. Meaningless. You were my anchor, he whispered, voice breaking. I thought I wanted freedom, but all I found was emptiness. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the silence settle heavy between us. Finally, when he ran out of words, I spoke. Softly. Clearly, I survived you, I said. I survived everything you did and everything you didn't. He blinked, stunned, as if he had expected me to beg, as if he thought the past could be scrubbed clean with a few salty tears. I smiled, not cruelly, but with a gentleness that was somehow sharper than any knife. I don't hate you, I said. You don't have that much power anymore. For a moment, he looked as if he might shatter right there in the middle of the cafe. But I didn't reach for him. I didn't comfort him. Instead, I rose, smoothing the fabric of my simple dress, feeling the solid earth under my feet. I left him there, surrounded by strangers, weeping into a half-cold cup of coffee. I didn't look back. The day my gallery opened, the sky blazed a clear, fierce blue, the kind that makes you believe in new beginnings. The space was small, tucked between a florist and a second-hand bookstore, but it was mine. The walls gleamed a fresh, clean white, the air rich with the smell of paint and wood and possibility. I hung my pieces myself, wild, fearless canvases, each one a piece of the journey. The woman curled around her own broken heart. The cage of wedding rings shattered open, the phoenix clawing its way out of a sea of ashes. People trickled in, curious locals, art lovers, strangers drawn by the rawness of it all. Marla was there, of course, standing proudly near the back, a glass of cheap champagne in her hand. Victoria Langley came too, a rare smile touching her stern mouth as she inspected the pieces like precious stones. And me? I stood among the paintings, breathing in the scent of fresh beginnings. No perfume, no wedding ring, no tether to anything but my own fierce, stubborn heart. A little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve, pointing at a painting called Reclamation. A woman walking alone into a sunrise, barefoot, wild-haired, free. She looks happy, the girl said. Her mother smiled. She does, doesn't she? I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling the steady beat there, strong and sure. Some stories aren't meant to be fixed. Some endings aren't tragedies. Some endings are just necessary. And in that moment, under the bright, unwavering sky, I knew this was not the end of my story. It was only the beginning.